Good evening. I'm Felix Lebeski. Welcome back to SL Tonight. Tonight, we'll open the vault and step into the haunted pages of Fawcett's Golden Age horror line. Three short tales of the uncanny, pulled from worlds of fear, this magazine is haunted, and strange suspense stories. These are stories of men who cheated death, ghosts that refused to stay buried, and puppets that were never truly wood and string. Settle in, the vault is open, and it is haunted. First, a lonely house on Hangman's Hill, and a man who has been collecting a royal pension for over 200 years. On Hangman's Hill. The two men stood there, faces grim beneath their black bowler hats, the rain slanting against their yellow macintoshes. One of them, a heavy, middle-aged man with a ragged gray mustache, reached up for the bronze knocker that hung from the ancient door. Gripping it tightly, he slammed it against the weather oaken panel. Listening intently, the two government agents could hear the sound of the knocker echoing thinly through the ancient mansion atop Hangman's Hill. Then there was a new sound, the shuffling of footsteps. The knob of the door grated, and it swung open on a rusted massive hinge. From behind it, a face peered out at the two men, a face that was incredibly seamed and wrinkled, suspicious, knowing, and weary. Yes? The old man asked. The heavier of the two men stepped forward, gloved hand touching the brim of his bowler briefly. I'm Sergeant McKnight of Scotland Yard, he explained in husky tones. And this, he nodded towards his companion, is Sergeant Perry, also of the yard. You take it you're Mr. Noose? Aye, nodded the old man, his gnarled fingers sliding down the door's edge. That I am, John Noose, Royal Hangman, and I have been these many years. That's what we want to talk to you about, said McKnight. Perhaps we'd best come in. Yes, do, muttered John Noose eagerly. Come in, officers of the Crown, always welcome. As the two Scotland Yard men stepped through the door, they found themselves in a tremendous vaulted chamber that looked as if it might have come directly from the Middle Ages. Huge, crudely carved boulders formed the walls of the hall. Moss and yellow lichen had long since found a home on these boulders, and rivulets of oozing moisture had worn thin, twisting trails along them. The only light in the chamber came from tiny arched windows that were set high up, close to the vaulted ceiling. And throughout there was a strange, clammy odor that clung irresistibly to every part of the hall, and to all those who entered it. Now, John Noose faced McKnight and Perry, you gentlemen have come to see me for a purpose. What is it? McKnight cleared his throat. It's a strange mission, sir, and one that we hardly know how to explain ourselves. The King's auditors, in examining government records, have discovered that you have been paid an annual pension by the Crown for more than 200 years. John Noose nodded his head, wispy strands of white hair falling over his parchment-like brow. It's true, he said. My pension payment has come promptly on the first of each month since 1750. There was little delay during the Crimean War, but since then it's been regular as clockwork. Sergeant McKnight struck his flat onto his palm sharply. That's impossible, he exclaimed. No man can live over 200 years. Is it possible that there's been a mistake? That you're the descendant of John Noose, the King's hangman? But the old man shook his head slowly from side to side. There's no mistake, he half whispered, his eyes glinting in the musty gloom. And I am that same man, still alive, but I can understand your wonder. Come, let me tell you how this happened, and let me show you. Bewildered and suspicious, the two Scotland Yard officers followed Noose as he led the way down the spiraling, century-worn stairs to the cellar. Lowering his candle, the hangman ducked under a low arch. They found themselves in a wide, low-ceilinged room. On one side of the room was an array of retorts and vats. Noose set the guttering flambeau down on a heavy timbered work table. Then he turned to face them. One emaciated hand gestured towards a huge mastiff that lay, ears pricked forward, by the largest of the vats. See that hound? He asked. How old do you think he is? Sergeant Perry frowned. He looked fairly old, perhaps 10, sir? John Noose shook his head again from side to side. You're mistaken. I purchased him as a puppy at the time of the Franco-Prussian War. He is more than 80 years old. This is insane, McKnight broke in. How can you tell me that you are more than 200 years old and that this hound is 80? It is impossible. For the first time, a mirthless smile twisted John Noose's lips. Wait, I'll explain it to you. He rubbed his dry hands together, seemingly lost in thought. Behind his head, the two officers could see an ancient clock. Slowly, its ornamented hands swept towards the hour. Then Noose began his story. You see, he said, as royal hangman, I slew many men, famous robbers and murderers, traitors to the state and pretenders. Even as a young man, I grew to fear the idea of death. I was in terror of the thought of meeting those shades myself after I had passed away. And I grew determined to avoid death, to learn the secret of eternal life. Noting the expression of disbelief on McKnight's face, he lifted his head, his eyes gleaming. It's not so strange. In the testaments we learn of men living many centuries. Ponce de Leon searched for the secret of eternal life and thought he had it. In a new continent, the high priests in Tibet are said to know of a secret valley where men endure forever. I determined to learn the secret for myself. And did you? Perry asked hoarsely, his eyes riveted on the old man. I did, Noose chuckled softly. It took me 40 years of experiment. After swinging a man from the gallows, I returned here, still in black cloak and hood, to work on my experiments. Finally, I reached a conclusion. It was this. All men are buried in graveyards. In the earth of these cemeteries, where so much life reaches its final resting place, there is bound to be the essence of life. I experimented with that soil. I boiled it, distilled it, grew molds in it. I was an alchemist, a biologist, and finally I drew from it what I wanted. A fluid that had the secret of eternal life. There is your answer. He inclined his bony skull towards the large vat closed by the lying mastiff. There it is, he said, my secret and my life. Unbelievable, Sergeant McKnight exclaimed. And it has kept the hound alive too? John Noose smiled. Aye, he replied. Suddenly, his face turned in alarm towards the clock. Time, he muttered. That's the one flaw, the one danger of the plan. The fluid must be taken every hour of the day and night to sustain life, and the minute hand is almost reaching the hour. I must hasten. Jerkily, clumsily, he seized the flagon and turned towards the vat. As he approached, the huge mastiff growled warning. Ah, the ancient hangman cursed. Out of the way, you old mangy cur. I must drink. I must drink. Cackling with excitement, he directed a swift kick at the powerful beast. In alarm, still dull with sleep, the giant dog sprang away from the blow, smashing into the base of the vat. The trough teetered for a moment precariously, then tipped over. Hitting the granite floor, its contents spewed forth an oily black liquid, reeking with odor, coiling in tar-like waves. No! No! The hangman exclaimed. It has spilled! My entire supply! Sinking to his knees, he reached out desperately, trying to pull the fluid together with his bony hands. But it evaded him, sinking into the cracks of the floor, rapidly vanishing. Then it was that the giant clock began to toll the hour. Bong! Bong! The sound reverberated shockingly throughout the cellar, sending its metal clamor into the hearts of those watching. Eyes bulging and brows sweating profusely, John Noose rose to his feet. Stammering, mumbling, in insane haste, he hurried to the side of the room where his chemical equipment was kept. Seizing jars and retorts, he began to compound a formula, pleading, Give me time! Time! A few moments, I pray you, only a few to prepare the potion. Time! But his time had run out. As the amazed detectives watched, the jars fell from his nerveless fingers. Staggering, he turned away from the workbench. He lifted a hand to his waxen face, staring up into the gloom. It's dawn, then, he whispered, and the gallows are ready, my lord. And the noose? All prepare to find him. Still muttering, he sank to the floor. Within a few moments, as the reek of the spilled liquid filled the room and the candle flame rose higher and higher, his form suddenly began to change. It drew together, darkened, turned liquid. And then it became nothing more than a black, slimy mass on the stone. For a moment it lay there, then it dissolved, leaving nothing. The two Scotland Yard men turned towards the mastiff, but he too was gone. Drawing their macintoshes about them, they fled up the cellar stairs, up into the light of day. They had a report to deliver. It was a report that no man would believe, but it was the truth. and in the files of the Royal Treasury there would be a new entry. John Noose, pension, begun 1750, ended 1952. Yeah. Next, high above the clouds, a face appears in an airplane window, and a debt from the war is finally paid in blood. In Revenge in the Clouds. Bill Harris, 6'4" newspaperman and former football star at Michigan, boarded the clipper ship in Hamburg, Germany. He was headed back to the United States after a whirlwind 6-week tour of Europe. Locked in his briefcase was enough material for the dozen articles his editor on the Chronicle had assigned him to write. He walked down the aisle, located his seat, and carefully stowed his briefcase on the overhead rack. The man sitting next to him looked up as he sat down. Bill extended his hand and said, "Harris is my name, Bill Harris. I'm headed for New York." That was the style. If he was going to sit next to a man for 13 hours, he might as well be on speaking terms. The man shook Bill's hand lightly. "Wilhelm Koch is my name. I too am bound for New York." Bill stared at Koch's face intently for a moment. He was trying to dig into his memory. Way back, at least 7 or 8 years back. He'd seen that face somewhere, and it was not one he liked. It was something hateful, something to be despised. But he couldn't remember why. "Are you headed for New York on business, Mr. Koch?" Bill asked. Koch looked up suspiciously from the magazine he was reading. "In a sense, yes. I have many things to attend to in the United States." As they talked, the plane suddenly started to gather speed along the runway, and in a matter of seconds it was airborne. Bill felt it bank sharply over the Hamburg airport and head over the North Sea. Koch braced himself quickly. "It was my first air trip, you know, and it is indeed a strange experience," Bill smiled in reply. The plane climbed higher and higher and finally leveled off at 30,000 feet. Bill looked at Koch. There was something painfully familiar about that face. And yet the features had been altered slightly, perhaps a mustache shaved off to fool a casual observer. "How soon do we pass over London, Mr. Koch?" Bill asked suddenly, as an idea occurred to him. Below he had sighted an island which had served as a landmark for both German and Allied bombers during the last war. Koch stared down at the island. 354 miles to London," he said tersely. Bill bit his upper lip. "Thank you." His mind was whirling. For a man who had never flown before, Koch was certainly familiar with landmarks. Bill carefully studied the man's face out of the corner of his eye. He knew that face. Koch was wanted someplace for something. Bill didn't know where or why, but he knew that Koch was a hunted man. Koch put down his magazine. "The plane certainly runs smoothly, doesn't it, Mr. Koch?" Bill asked. "It is very nice, but of course I know little of these things." The conversation died off as suddenly as it had begun. It was obvious that Koch didn't want to talk. Bill craned his neck, looking out through the wide window at Koch's side. Billowy cloud formations flew past quickly, and occasionally a shower of sparks from the plane's exhaust streaked through the sky. The plane roared on. As the plane roared on, Bill was thinking of some way to draw Koch into conversation. Perhaps he could trick him into revealing his true identity. Suddenly, Koch, his face frozen in terror, rammed his elbow into Bill's side. Bill looked up, astounded. Outside the window of the plane, which was then cruising at over 350 miles an hour at 30,000 feet, was the determined face of an airman. He was dressed in the battle gear of a United States Army pilot of World War II. The letters USAF were printed across his helmet, his goggles were pulled down over his eyes, and his mouth was twisted in a horrified and triumphant sneer. He stared intently at Koch for a few moments, then pushed the goggles back onto his forehead, revealing a pair of cold, expressionless blue eyes. Koch tried to scream, but though his mouth was wide open in horror, no sound escaped. The face in the window smiled grimly for a few more moments, and then quickly a pistol butt was raised and the window was smashed in loudly. Then a hand holding a .45 caliber pistol was extended into the cabin. Bill heard a quiet laugh, and then Koch managed to let out one last agonizing scream for mercy. But it was too late. The gun went off with a loud bang, and Koch slumped over in his seat, dead. As the echo of the shot died away, and the passengers on the plane slowly realized what had happened, they were thrown into a near panic. Word was sent forward to the captain, In a few moments the stewardesses had the situation well in hand. A terse message was radioed ahead, and 4 hours later the plane landed in New York. Police Inspector Carr pushed his hat back on his head. "Are you sure nothing was touched, Captain?" he asked. Captain Milgrove, pilot of the huge clipper, nodded. "Nothing at all." Carr shook his head as he surveyed the scene. He walked over to the seat and rolled the body over slowly. "Look here," he exclaimed. "A gun. A regulation U.S. Army .45. He picked the weapon up and carefully wrapped it in a clean cloth. "We'll have it examined for prints. Meanwhile, let's get the body off the plane and have some pictures taken." 2 members of the police laboratory squad were called in, and after a few photographs had been taken, the body was carried away. As the stretcher was borne out through the open door of the plane, Bill took one last look at the face of the dead man. Something was awakened in his memory. "Inspector, I'll be over at the Chronicle building in case you need me for questioning. I may have something for you in a few hours anyway." "Okay, Harris, and thanks." Bill hopped into a cab and flashed over to the Chronicle building. He dashed to the lobby into an elevator and got out a few moments later on the 6th floor. He raced down the hall into the morgue and grabbed a photo file marked German. Quickly turning to the folder marked Military Leaders, he leaped his way through impatient. Suddenly, he had it. The face of Wilhelm Koch stared at him from a 9 by 12-inch glossy photograph. Only his name wasn't Koch. It was Gerhard Brechner, a colonel in the German Luftwaffe. Bill sped over to the story file on Brechner and read one story after another about it. Brechner machine guns bomber crews at parachutes. Brechner kills 4 as they bail out a flaming RAF plane. One story after another told the same tale. Brechner, the Butcher of the Air, as he was called, had gained a widespread reputation for the murdering in cold blood of parachuting Allied airmen. After the war, he'd been sought throughout Germany for his infamous war crimes, but no trace of him was ever discovered. But how did all this tie together? How could a face suddenly appear in a window of an airliner, smash the glass, and shoot a man seated there? Bill didn't believe in the supernatural, but there was certainly no other explanation for what had happened. And then the gun. Would there be prints on it? Perhaps that would explain everything. Bill dashed out of the Chronicle office over to the police headquarters. Inspector Carr was seated in the laboratory, awaiting the results of the fingerprint test. "Any leads, Harris?" he asked as Bill rushed in. "Yeah, Inspector. The dead man isn't Wilhelm Koch. He's a Gerhard Brechner, sometimes called the Butcher of the Luftwaffe. He has the nice trick of machine gunning parachuting airmen. They've been looking all over Europe for him. Seems someone got him before the police." "Okay, Harris, but how did he get shot through the window of that plane? Don't tell me that angels did it." "Inspector," called the laboratory technician, "the results are here. It's a regulation .45 caliber Army Air Force weapon. Prints belong to a Lieutenant Glenn Caldwell, an Air Force fighter pilot killed in action during the war." "Come on, Inspector," shouted Bill. "I think we got this solved." They dashed out of the building into a police car and sped over to the morgue at the Chronicle building. Bill hunted among the files for a few minutes and then pulled out a group of clippings on Lieutenant Glenn Caldwell, USAF, killed in action July 6, 1944. The inspector and Bill read through the stories. Slowly, a look of horror came over them. The clipping before them read, "London, July 6, 1944. Lieutenant Glenn Caldwell, who vowed to avenge the death of his parachuting brother at the hands of the Luftwaffe's infamous Colonel Brechner, died today at the hands of his brother's killer. While tracking the German over the North Sea, he developed engine trouble and had to bail out. His last radio message was, 'Have to hit the silk even though Brechner is around. But I'll get him sooner or later, no matter what happens.'" The end. And finally, under the big top, where jealousy burns hotter than any circus fire, and the puppets may be more alive than the man who pulls their strings. In The Rivals. Mr. Gabberty peeped through the hidden eye-hole of his Punch and Judy show and cursed to himself. Only 3 people stood in front of his booth now. When he'd begun, there was over 2 dozen. And there they were, he asked himself, grating his teeth and glancing across the circus grounds to another tent, brightly painted and thronged. At Mr. Geppetto's, of course. Mr. Gabberty crowded down his anger and finished the show, letting Punch save Judy from the terrible dragon. He didn't feel like it, but he had to. The 3 members of the audience had paid admittance, and cash was low with him. In fact, he admitted to himself he had earned so little money that week that he was hungry. To be hungry was, to the once plump but thinning Mr. Gibberty, not only a tragedy, but an outrage. Before Geppetto had come with his puppets, money had flowed into Gibberty's cash box. But now, still hungry after closing his tent, Mr. Gibberty took his troubles to Mr. Keller, the owner of the traveling circus. In Mr. Keller's private wagon, he stood up and poured out his woe. Mr. Keller shrugged. "What can I do?" he asked. "Geppetto's puppets are a big drawing card for the show. That's why I hired him. I certainly didn't bring him in as competition for you, Gibberty." He paused and shrugged again, like the businessman he was. "And if he is competition, what of it? Is not competition the life of trade? And so far as Geppetto is concerned, it would be the death of me," Gibberty said bitterly. "There's nothing I can do," Mr. Keller said. "Nothing?" Gibberty asked. "Didn't I have the exclusive contract for a puppet show when we started out? Didn't I, out of the goodness of my heart, allow you to hire Geppetto by allowing my own contract to be breached?" Mr. Keller nodded. "All that is true, and I am grateful, Gibberty," he said. "And you will not starve. No member of my circus starves. We will take care of you." "I will not be a beggar," Gibberty exclaimed, rising. "I am an artist." "So is Geppetto," Keller remarked soberly. "Good day, Mr. Gibberty." Outside the wagon, Gibberty found an impotent anger. He glanced toward Geppetto's tent and found it more crowded than ever. Passing it on his way back to the tent where his own show was housed, he glanced in at the flap. The puppets were dancing away merrily. He couldn't see Geppetto, of course. Geppetto was perched on the alcove above the puppet stage, manipulating. But he could guess Geppetto's smug, satisfied smile as he handled the intricate puppet strings, aware that out in front was a good, fat audience. In his ears were ringing, no doubt, the sounds of silver chiming on the cash register stone. In that instant, Gibberty's resolve was fixed. Now he knew what he would do. The puppet show wasn't worth much without puppets. Puppets could be destroyed by fire. And in Geppetto's tent, as in all the others, hung kerosene lamps for night use. What could be easier, Mr. Gibberty ruminated thoughtfully, than to steal under cover of darkness to Geppetto's storage tent, where he kept his puppets, threw down the kerosene lamp on the straw floor, and exit quickly. It would be considered an accident. And Geppetto would have to leave the show, he exulted, sealing the bargain with himself. Then Gibberty would come into his own. At midnight he issued forth from his tent, silent. No one was on the circus grounds as he circled round Geppetto's tent, listening. Nothing stirred within the puppet tent, though the lamp burned. In the other tent, he guessed Geppetto was busy over a late supper. Silently, stealthily, he lifted the tent flap and crawled inside. He stared around at the trunks Geppetto used for storing the puppets between towns on the circuit route. Then, unhooking the kerosene lamp, Gibberty poured some of the liquid it contained on the trunks, some on the straw floor. He paused, hearing a burst of laughter from the adjoining tent where Geppetto was. Evidently, he thought, Geppetto was enjoying himself with a few friends. As he smashed the lamp groundwork, he grinned. Geppetto would enjoy nothing now. Quickly, he retired to his tent. Within minutes, the alarm was given. Gibberty, feigning surprise, burst from his tent, attired in a nightshirt, to find Geppetto's tent in flames. He watched the roustabouts bring up pails of water, saw the tent flare higher and fire. Then they took a half an hour to put it out. From his tent, Gibberty smiled. Fire or water, what did it matter? Both had now ruined Geppetto's puppet. In the morning, he wanted to present his condolences. "Come in, Signor," came Geppetto's soft voice as Gibberty rapped softly on the tent pole. Gibberty entered. He had never before been within the tent. For that matter, he realized Geppetto had never been within his own tent. Geppetto visited no one. Gibberty remembered keeping much to himself. Then he gasped. Arrayed around Geppetto as he sat at a table were all his puppets, unharmed, neither fire burned nor water soaked. "You are surprised, Signor?" Geppetto asked. Gibberty was speechless for an instant. Why do you ask that?" he began. "Because you thought you had destroyed them all," Geppetto said. "It is a lie," Gibberto said indignantly. "It is the truth," Geppetto said quietly. He pointed to a puppet. "Andolfo here told me it was you who came into my tent and set fire to it." "The puppet told you?" He had gone back to the puppet tent for a bottle of wine. said. It was then he saw you. We were, the puppets and I, eating in the other tent. Here. Eating? Gavirti said in horror. Since when? My puppets are rather extraordinary, Geppetto said, smiling sardonically. They were made by a powerful magician in Italy, Signor. They are very lifelike because they really do live, in a way. They're not human, but they do eat, breathe, and laugh. Sighed. Everything I had to the great Zampini who created these puppets. Ah, what a genius. His face saddened. He's dead, of course, but these puppets are his monument. Something snapped in Gavirti's brain. He clapped his hand to his pocket. Hatred, insane hatred, distorted his face. You are disturbed, Senor, Geppetto asked. You're afraid I'll tell the police, perhaps? Gavirti sprang, the clasp knife in his pocket spring open as he drew it. He plunged it into Geppetto's breast, again and again. Breathing heavily, he staggered back. The eyes of the puppets followed him, transfixing him like a knife. Then Geppetto stirred, opening his eyes. You live? You do not die? Gavirti whispered hoarsely. Geppetto laughed. Why should I die, Signor Gavirti? He asked. I told you of the genius of Zampini, did I not? Zampini? What of that? Geppetto put his hand to his head, unsnapped something near his scalp, and drew his face down. Gavirti stared at the sawdust behind the mask. It is only, Signor Gavirti, Geppetto said, that I myself am Zampini's masterpiece, a puppet master. Geppetto watched Gavirti begin to giggle madly, break down bit by bit, then go insane. Slowly, Gavirti crumpled to the floor. As the roustabouts took Gavirti away, Geppetto glanced up from the puppet, Randolfo, whose robe he was sewing. Ah, what a pity, he breathed. Poor Signor Gavirti. It must have been hunger that drove him mad. The end. There you go. 3 tales from the Fawcett Horror Vault. John Noose, who outlived his own century, a ghost pilot who finished what the war left undone, and a puppet master who discovered that some strings can never be cut. If these stories chilled you, let me know in the comments which haunted tale you want next. Full classic comics available at www.sltonight.com. This is Felix Lebeski. Thanks for watching. The vault remains open, and the night is long. Remember, we are where the nightmares go. This has been SL Tonight. Good night.